Welcome back, everyone, to more NASCAR Heat 3 coverage here at Knee Pit Gaming. Today's setup video is going to take us to Dover. We'll be taking a look at all three of the top series from the trucks, Xfinity, and finally the Monster Energy Cup cars. We'll be talking about the setup itself. We'll be talking about the lap times. I uploaded a gameplay video a little bit earlier today, 28 laps in the Cup cars against the maximum difficulty AI. You can see I've raced 4 races here in the Cup cars anyway, and have 4 wins. So there's plenty of speed, but the most important thing at Dover really isn't speed. You need speed everywhere, but the most important thing at Dover is maneuverability and controllability of the car. If the car is not stable at Dover, you're going to get in trouble real quick because you spend nearly all of your time in traffic in one way or another. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and start with the trucks. All right, so we're in the trucks, and let's start by discussing the track itself, the AI, and lap times just a little bit. The AI are extremely aggressive in all 3 series here at this track. They really have no trouble in blocking you and cutting you off on corner entry. So if you're going to get up next to somebody, you better do it early on the straightaway and be well up beside them before they're going to give you any room. I've had multiple instances where I was inside of someone and they cut down on me and ran me off the track on corner entry. So be careful with that. You see that happen a little bit in the gameplay that I uploaded a little bit earlier today. I'll have a link in the description below to that, but that's why I use the outside quite a bit here for passing, is just because it's a little bit safer since they'll give you more room on the outside than they will on the inside. As far as lap times, in the trucks, I'm somewhere 23.5, 23.6, 23.7, anywhere in that range, and you should be really okay. There's some good racing here with the AI in the trucks. They're fairly fast at the front of the field. Now, you're going to have a lot of back markers and a lot of slower cars, but if you get to the front of the field, it's generally some pretty good racing in all 3 series, and particularly in the trucks. On the setup side of things, I'm going to show you a couple of different ways of doing the shocks. Again, these are by no means the only ways of doing them. This is just what feels good for me and seems to work well for me. But we're going to use 5 on bump and 7 on rebound on all of those. Again, it's not to say that you have to use the same thing on all of the shocks. By no means do you have to do that. It's just keeping it simple for me, and these work. But again, I'll show you a little bit different way of doing that when we get to the other cars. Weight settings, maximum left side weight, front weight, and wedge are much higher here. That gives us our stability in the car. The more nose weight, the more wedge you have in the car, the more stable the car generally is going to be, because it's going to rotate a little bit slower as opposed to, because you're going to make a very quick entry to the corner. You're really going to dive down into the corner, and you want the car to be stable under you while you're doing that. So that's why I'm using 53% on front weight and 54% on wedge. If you want the car to rotate a little bit quicker, a little bit more, then simply lower that wedge number. If the car is just a little bit too tight for your liking and going a little bit too far up the track, particularly in the center of the corner, and you're having trouble getting it turned, then maybe back off of that nose weight or front weight just a little bit. Moving on to the springs, I like a really stiff spring package here, and that's why I have very nearly the stiffest springs that you could put in the car. 1,200 pounds on both of the front springs, that's the maximum number, and the right rear spring at 600 pounds is the maximum number you can use back there. It's a shame we can't get even more than that, because they definitely use bigger springs than that in real life in the rear of the car. The left rear spring is 100 pounds less, so I got 100 pounds of rear spring split, and that's simply to help the car turn, but it's not a whole lot because I don't want the car to get loose under the throttle, because you spend so much time on the throttle, and you spend so much time, as I mentioned, very close to other cars in traffic. So 100 pounds seems to work pretty good. If you need the car to rotate better, particularly from the center of the corner off, then my first thing to do would be to lower that left rear spring some and see if that doesn't help you get the car to rotate a little better under throttle. On tire settings, 26, 27 pounds, 25 pounds, somewhere in that range on the left sides should work fine. On the right sides, I'm using the maximum 50 pounds because I like the feel of it, and it seems to pick me up a tenth or two, sometimes more than that, depending on the track. However, if you want to go for more of a traditional right side pressure, then somewhere 32 to 34 pounds should work just fine for that. On the miscellaneous settings, left front camber is maxed out. The right front camber, you can run it maxed out. I run it just a little bit less at 7 degrees. Reason being, particularly on corner exits, similar to what I get at Bristol, if I'm using maximum camber here, the car likes to get a little twitchy on exit. So I back off the camber just a little bit just to keep the car underneath me on exit. Front sway bar is my standard 1.15. No real reason to change that. But if you want to increase that, that should slow down the rotation of the car, make the car tighter overall. Just be careful about going too much. You'll ruin your front end grip by going too high on this. Left side track bar and right side track bar, both at 12 inches. I traditionally keep a fairly flat track bar simply for the stability of the car. And if I need the car to turn more or be looser overall, then I'll simply raise both sides in general. Or if the car is too loose, then particularly with the rear end of the car, then I like to lower the track bar, both the left and right hand side. Again, that's just a personal preference. If you raise the right side track bar more than the left side, then that can help you particularly on exit to get the car to turn. It's similar to increasing your rear spring split on the rear springs. Brake bias anywhere from 72 to about 75 seems to work okay there. Adjust that to your liking. Grill tape, again, doesn't make any difference whatsoever in this game, just like last year, unfortunately, as far as downforce or drag. The main thing, you just don't want to get it too high. Get up around 225 degrees and above, and you start losing power, and you'll need to come in to the pits to take off some of the tape. So 40% seems to work good for the grill tape, but there's plenty of room to maneuver on that. Wheel lock is pretty standard at 10 degrees for me on the asphalt tracks. Dirt tracks sometimes run more than that. The wheel lock is really a function of how quick you want the steering to be. The higher this number is, if you go up to 12 or 15 and so on, then the steering will get quicker. If you lower this number down to 9, 8 and so on, then the steering will get a little bit slower. So that can particularly help you on corner entry. If the car is a little bit too twitchy, then maybe back off the wheel lock a little bit. Steering offset is at 0.1, and that is simply to offset that hard pull to the left from all the camber we're running in the front of the car. Gear settings, as I've mentioned before, I generally don't mess with first through fourth gear unless I see a huge reason to do so. I usually just stick with the rear end ratio, and it's at 3.6, but there's plenty of room to maneuver with that. If you want to turn more RPMs, make the car a little bit looser, then you'll increase that number. If you want the car to turn fewer RPMs or be a little bit tighter, particularly under throttle, then simply lower the rear end ratio. Lower numbers, that is. So that'll do it for our discussion of the trucks. Now let's move on to Xfinity. Next in the Xfinity cars, we'll talk a little bit about lap times first, and then we'll get into the setup itself, which is extremely similar and almost identical to the trucks. Lap times for the Xfinity cars, you can get somewhere around a 23 flat, 23.1, 23.2, anywhere in that range. You should be in good shape as far as speed against the maximum difficulty AI. As far as the setup goes, here you see a little bit different shock package that I'm using, a little bit softer. And the reason I did that, again, 5 and 7, just like you saw in the trucks, works just fine as well as many other combinations for the shocks. But I chose to keep it simple and go with sort of the minimum bump and a little bit stiffer on the rebound, simply because it helps the car travel, for me, a little bit better on entry and exit when you have those sharp transitions into and off the corners. So I want to make sure the shocks help me get into and off the corners by keeping the car steady and underneath me while I'm doing so. Otherwise, you'll notice that the other settings are identical. until we get over to the miscellaneous settings, and the track bar is a little bit lower at 11 inches across, and that's simply because the car turns a little bit better in the Xfinity cars than the trucks, and I need to back off just a little bit on that track bar to make sure I keep the car under me, particularly on exit of the corner. Other than that, everything is pretty much the same. Gear settings a little bit different. I'm using a 375 as opposed to a 360 here. But again, you've got plenty of room to maneuver with the gearing to suit your taste. That'll take care of the Xfinity cars. Now finally, let's move over to Cup. Taking a look at the Cup cars, let's first start off with the lap times, and anywhere from a 22.5 to a 22.7, somewhere in that range, again, should be plenty fast enough for the maximum difficulty AI, and should leave you in very good shape come race time. The setup itself, you notice that everything is identical or virtually identical. The shock settings, I went back to the 5 and 7 on the bump and rebound respectively for the Cup cars, but again, 3.5 works among many other possible combinations. Track bar under miscellaneous settings is a little bit lower still than the Xfinity at 10 inches. Again, that's just to keep the car underneath me, particularly on corner exit, although it also helps on corner entry if you're a little bit skittish and the car is wanting to get away from you on corner entry. Everything else is fairly standard. Rear end ratio on the gear settings is at 389. Again, a little bit different than what we saw in the other two cars. But as always, there's plenty of room to maneuver there and either increase or decrease that to fit your liking, just like we talked about in our trucks discussion. So to end things, let's talk a little bit about how I drive this track. In the gameplay series that I uploaded a little bit earlier today, again, the link to that is in the description below. I tend to run very aggressive at this track, and I like to set the car up so that I can drive the car deep into the corner, but don't necessarily have to. That's where the stability in the car really comes into play. If I have a car that's very stable, then I can generally get by with driving it into the corner deeper when I need to if I'm on the inside of someone, or when I'm alone on the track running laps by myself, whether because I'm in the lead or simply have a little bit of gap in front and behind me, then I can simply lift earlier, get the car down to the bottom, let it rotate on its own, all that kind of thing. But I want to make sure that I can be aggressive, particularly when I'm underneath someone or on the outside of someone and involved in some hard racing, which definitely happens at this track with the AI. They are extremely aggressive, as I mentioned earlier, so be ready for that. But that'll do it for our discussion of Dover. Hopefully you enjoyed it and can take away some things that you can use in your own setup. Thank you very much for joining me, and stay tuned for more as we continue our coverage of NASCAR Heat 3.